4-year-old girl walks into a public restroom with her biological mother and is never seen again. It happened in a matter of minutes, in broad daylight, inside a crowded shopping mall in Washington state. Her name was Aranza Maria Ochoa Lopez, a name now etched into the memories of millions, but not for the reasons you might think. They used to say, no one just disappears in a crowd unless the whole world isn't paying attention. And for Aranza, the world wasn't paying attention, not for over 4 years. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't that she was kidnapped. It was who took her. Because the person who vanished with Aranza was the very same person the system once trusted to protect her. Aranza wasn't a stranger to Washington's child welfare system. She was placed in foster care at just 3 years old after her mother, Esmeralda Lopez Lopez, was investigated for physical abuse. Even so, like many children in similar situations, Aranza was still allowed to have supervised visits with her mother. One of those visits took place on an October afternoon at Vancouver Mall. Busy, loud, public. A place where nothing should have gone wrong. But just minutes after walking into the restroom together, Aranza and her mother were gone. No one saw them leave. No security camera caught them slipping away. All that remained was a stunned caseworker and a bathroom door left slightly open, never to close again. What happened inside that room? How could a mother, who no longer had custody, so easily vanish with her child from a public space? And why, for years afterward, did every trail seem to fade into nothing? This isn't just the story of a kidnapping. It's a story about trust, about how invisible children of color can become in a broken system, and about a journey no one thought would end with a miracle. But the most unexpected part was still to come, because after more than 4 years, Aranza was found. Now, let's go back to where it all began and ask the question, what really happened that afternoon? Here is the translated and culturally adapted English version of your script, keeping the documentary-style flow, emotional tone, and structure intact for voice AI narration. In the suburbs of Vancouver, Washington, life moves slowly, like the soft drizzle that so often blankets the Pacific Northwest. Quiet, tree-lined streets, aging playgrounds tucked behind housing blocks, and bus stops where no one really stops to look around. This was the world Aranza Maria Ochoa Lopez grew up in, a part of it, but never truly belonging. Aranza entered the foster care system at just 3 years old, not because she was orphaned, but because a court had stripped her mother of custody after repeated incidents of abuse. To most, it was just another file in a sea of family violence cases. But for Aranza, it meant waking up in a new place each day, a new room, a new face saying, "We're here to help you." The system, designed to protect, can feel like a maze of loneliness for children like Aranza. Schools changed constantly. Friends came and went before they could ever become close. Adults, caseworkers, nurses, teachers, drifted in and out of her life, like background characters in a story with no ending. Still, Aranza was a quiet, observant little girl. She loved coloring, especially with purple crayons. She liked watching cartoons on her iPad at night, when everything around her was finally still. She kept to herself in class, but would sometimes burst out laughing at a silly joke. For those who cared for her, what stood out wasn't fear, but caution, as if she was always silently measuring, who can I trust, and who will leave next? The world around Aranza barely noticed her. Like so many children in the system, she was nearly invisible, unspoken, unasked about. In a busy, burdened America, children of color in foster care often go unseen until something terrible happens. And for Aranza, that moment was only weeks away. Aranza Maria Ochoa Lopez was born on February 17, 2014, in Washington state. The daughter of a young, single Latina mother, she never had what most would call a complete family. She never knew what it felt like to have a father. The earliest photos of Aranza show a dimly lit apartment, her face turned slightly, as if looking for someone just out of frame, someone she couldn't name. She wasn't the kind of child to throw tantrums. If anything, there was a quietness about her, the kind you only see in children who've learned to anticipate an adult's anger. One foster mother recalled, she never cried when punished. She'd just pull the blanket over her head and hum this little tune in Spanish. We never figured out what song it was, just a melody she'd repeat, like a tiny umbrella shielding her from the storm. Once at a preschool where she stayed for a month, a teacher noticed Aranza's drawings were unusual. Not houses with chimneys, not smiling suns, but long hallways, closed doors, and a woman facing away. When asked about it, Aranza simply said, "That's where my mom went." But she didn't come back. Still, she had moments of pure childhood joy. She once giggled uncontrollably at a fluffy dog wearing a Santa hat. She loved Oreo cookies, always chose the window seat on the bus. And she had a plastic doll she named Nina. No one was allowed to touch it. One caseworker said, she lived in her own little world, but it wasn't shut off. If you were patient enough, she'd invite you in. Aranza was the kind of child caught between two worlds, one of fragmented memories and pain, and one built on fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, adults could change. At the center of it all was a small soul quietly waiting for something no one dared name. Love without fear. But what few people, even those who cared for Aranza, ever realized was that she never stopped talking about her mother, not with anger, but with a kind of blurry hope, the kind only a child can hold on to for that long. She never said, "Mom hurt me," or "I hate her." She said, "Mom gets mad, but she'll smile again." Maybe, for Aranza, it was the only way to make sense of a world that never made sense to begin with. And that unbroken bond is what opened the door to tragedy. Esmeralda Lopez Lopez, Aranza's biological mother, was a young woman with long black hair and eyes that sometimes flickered with something unsettling. She was born into a Mexican immigrant family, raised in the poorer neighborhoods of Washington state, where the American dream was often nothing more than a flyer taped to a grocery store window. Esmeralda's childhood was a cycle of moves, fights, and slammed doors. She became pregnant with Aranza in her early 20s. No family nearby, no stable job, living in a government-subsidized apartment. Neighbors said she was unpredictable. One day she'd laugh and play with Aranza outside. The next, she'd scream in the middle of the night, loud enough for someone to call the cops. Child Services first took notice when Aranza was just 2, after an anonymous tip reported bruises on her arm at a local clinic. From there, the file grew thicker each month. Mandatory counseling, surprise home checks, and finally, the decision to remove Aranza from her care. But strangely, and perhaps tragically, the court still allowed Esmeralda to visit her daughter, under supervision. A caseworker once wrote in a report, "Esmeralda is cooperative, but there's something in her eyes. I never feel safe looking away." Visits were brief, just 1 hour, held in safe locations. Community center lounges, or sometimes inside a shopping mall with staff nearby. During those visits, Aranza never cried. She clung to her mother, like she feared time would slip away too fast. And Esmeralda, at least on the surface, was gentle. She'd bring snacks, old toys, and sometimes tell fairy tales in Spanish. The system logged those visits as low risk, but what no one fully recognized was the patience of a mother who'd been planning for a long time. To Esmeralda, her daughter wasn't a memory stolen, but the last thing she had control over in a chaotic life, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. Not by regaining custody legally, but by disappearing with Aranza, no matter the consequences. And on October 25th, 2018, she did exactly that. Thursday afternoon, October 25th, 2018. The sky over Vancouver, Washington was gray, as usual. Inside the bustling Vancouver Mall, shoppers moved in and out, preparing for Halloween. In that sea of faces, no one noticed a 4-year-old girl walking alongside a dark-haired woman, shadowed by a young social worker carrying a clipboard, eyes scanning everything around them. It was a court-approved, supervised visit, 1 hour strictly scheduled. The mall was chosen as the meeting spot for its open atmosphere, a public place designed to ease the child's anxiety. Esmeralda arrived on time. She looked neat, carried a plastic bag with snacks and a few worn toys. Aranza hugged her mother the moment she saw her, as if the months apart had never happened. They strolled past a clothing store, paused at the indoor play area. The social worker stayed close, not too close to disrupt their connection, but near enough to intervene if needed. Everything played out like it had for months. Nothing seemed unusual. About 15 minutes before the visit was scheduled to end, Esmeralda asked to take Aranza to the restroom. The worker agreed, and they walked toward the women's restroom on the first floor. The door closed behind them, and then came silence. 1 minute passed, then 2. The social worker began to feel uneasy. She knocked, no answer. Called out again, still nothing. She requested mall security. When the door was finally opened, the restroom was empty. The back service door, meant only for janitorial staff, was left slightly ajar. An alert was immediately triggered. Police arrived within 10 minutes. They pulled security footage, but in a cruel twist of fate, the camera covering the hallway outside the restroom had gone dark at the exact time they entered. The last image recorded was Esmeralda holding Aranza's hand walking in. No footage of them leaving. No car spotted. No one heard a scream. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, beyond the reach of law or logic. Within moments, the Vancouver Police Department locked down the mall. An emergency response team swept the entire building. Exit by exit, they checked every corner, but found no trace of Aranza or Esmeralda. No suspicious movement. No leads. Only one camera had captured their presence, and it was the same camera that mysteriously lost signal during the key window of time. Investigators flagged it immediately. A disturbing coincidence. Or something far more deliberate? They expanded the search to nearby parking lots. Still, nothing. No car linked to Esmeralda. No one fleeing in a rush. That night, an Amber Alert was issued across Washington and into neighboring states. Her face, a bright-eyed little girl with soft brown hair, flashed across television screens in thousands of homes across the Pacific Northwest. Electronic highway signs lit up. Social media spread her story within hours. A ripple of fear swept through the community. At her preschool, where Aranza had once attended part-time, teachers created a small memorial with photos, stuffed animals brought in by classmates. Residents held a candlelight vigil outside the mall, singing in both English and Spanish. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew this wasn't going to be a quick recovery. People don't kidnap children in broad daylight, unless it's been planned. Within 48 hours, the FBI officially took over, given the federal nature of child abduction and the likelihood of crossing state lines. Agents dug into Esmeralda's records, flagged Border Patrol, and issued a nationwide warrant. Bank accounts, medical records, phone logs, travel history. Everything was reviewed. But what troubled them most wasn't Esmeralda's location. It was the suspicion that she'd been planning this for a long time. Her social media accounts had all been deleted days before the abduction. Her phone went dark. A camera near her former residence showed her car, abandoned on the side of the road. The car was gone. The accounts were wiped, and a little girl had vanished. As investigators dug deeper, the puzzle pieces pointed not to a rash, emotional act, but to a calculated escape. And worse, they began noticing cracks in the very system designed to protect Aranza. First, the delay in response. Internal logs showed it took nearly 7 minutes. From the time Esmeralda and Aranza entered the restroom to when the alert was triggered. 7 minutes. No sounds. No door forced open. No protocol breached. Because staff are trained not to intervene unless danger is confirmed. But in those 7 minutes, a child was taken from what was considered a safe space, and every trace of her disappeared. Second, the cameras. Vancouver Mall had over 60 surveillance devices, yet at least 4 near the women's restroom on the first floor either malfunctioned or went dark between 3:42 and 4:05 p.m. Coincidence? Or did someone know where the blind spots were? Third, and perhaps most unsettling, was the apartment where Esmeralda once lived. When police arrived, the place had been completely cleared out, at least 3 days before the abduction. Neighbors hadn't seen her in that time, yet she still showed up for her scheduled visit, smiling, carrying toys, holding her daughter like nothing was about to happen. Investigators began to wonder, had she been planning this for weeks? Maybe even months? And then, a final detail, small, but enough to make the entire FBI team stop cold. Aranza didn't have a phone, of course. She was 4. But in one of their last visits, a caseworker had noticed Esmeralda slipping a toy phone into her daughter's bag. No one thought much of it at the time, but now they wondered, was it more than a toy? A tracker? A signaling device. That toy phone was never found, and there was no proof of accomplices. No car. No video. No known route. The case ended at a closed bathroom door and a chilling silence in a system once believed to be foolproof. One question echoed through every press briefing, every strategy meeting. How could a single mother, without money, support, or resources, pull off the perfect escape? No one had the answer. But one thing was clear. Aranza was gone. And with every passing day, hope faded a little more. Here is the next section of your script, translated and adapted into natural, emotionally resonant English for narration. In the first week after Aranza disappeared, police and FBI agents began questioning everyone who had contact with Esmeralda. In the 3 months leading up to October 25th, neighbors, social workers, clerks at the grocery store where she used to buy milk and diapers. The result, a tangled mess of leads, too many, too conflicting, and too inconsistent. A downstairs neighbor claimed he hadn't seen Esmeralda for at least a week before the abduction, but a store employee insisted she bought frozen food just 3 days before. A former roommate recalled Esmeralda once mentioning she might leave the country, but when asked to explain, she laughed it off as a crazy dream. No one knew for sure where Esmeralda went, but what caught investigators' attention was that at least 3 witnesses reported seeing a strange man lurking near her old apartment building in the weeks before the incident. He drove a gray pickup truck with no front license plate, didn't live in the complex, didn't know anyone there, but he'd sit in the truck for hours, smoking, just staring up at the apartments. One witness described him as Latino, early 30s, eyes like steel. This raised a chilling possibility. Esmeralda might not have acted alone, but the twist? She had no known boyfriend. No contact with her family in Mexico. No close friends. At least none known to law enforcement, who would help her commit an interstate, possibly international, abduction. When the FBI released a composite sketch of the man to the public, no one recognized him. No one came forward. No one knew his name. And just like Esmeralda, he disappeared, as if he never existed at all. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger things became. There was no ransom, no threats, no legal filings for custody. The case had no clear end, because even its beginning had become a blur of unreliable witness statements. With every domestic lead fading, the FBI shifted focus. What if Esmeralda had taken Aranza across the border to Mexico, a place where extradition laws are tricky? Border enforcement is more porous. And, critically, where Esmeralda had roots, immigration records revealed she'd once lived in Michoacan, Mexico, with her parents during her teenage years. Though she hadn't been in contact with them for years, it was still familiar ground. In a leaked internal memo, one senior investigator wrote, "If she planned this as a true escape, there's only one place she could vanish without a trace: her old home." From that lead, the FBI reached out to Mexican authorities, working with the National Institute of Migration, and the Michoacan State Prosecutor's Office to expand the search. But again, nothing. No border agents remembered seeing a woman with a young girl. No immigration records. No footage from checkpoints. They checked every roadside inn, bus terminal, and bank transaction. Everything was wiped clean. Then came something suspicious. A new Facebook account recently created. No profile photo, no posts, but it was following community groups in Michoacan and Puebla. Strangely, it liked a post from the FBI about Aranza, and the very next day, the account was deleted. The FBI couldn't trace the IP. It had been masked by a virtual network, but they believed this might be someone silently watching, someone who didn't want to be found, but very much wanted to know how close the investigation was. Another unsettling realization came from an uncomfortable truth. Parental abductions were on the rise, and often not treated as serious crimes. Under U.S. law, when a parent without custody rights takes a child, it's often classified as a minor offense, sometimes just probation, if they turn themselves in, which explained why Esmeralda never asked for ransom, never tried to negotiate. She didn't have to. All she had to do was vanish. By late November 2018, a confidential report summarized an FBI briefing. "We're dealing with a non-traditional abduction. No money, no violence. Just one thing, a disappearance that was carefully orchestrated. And without a major break, that child may never come back." So let's rewind. not to repeat what we already know, but to see things from a different angle. From the man who lived upstairs from Esmeralda's old apartment. His name was Michael Rivers, a 62-year-old veteran. He'd lived in that building for over 2 decades. Not the talkative type, but in December 2018, he made a call to police because something had been bothering him. In the call log, Michael said, I don't know if this matters, but I remember one night, a few days before the news broke, I heard heavy footsteps on the back stairwell. That stairway is mostly used by delivery people. I peeked through the door. I saw a woman in a black hoodie rushing up the stairs, followed by a tall man in a face mask. They didn't speak, but what caught my eye? She was carrying a little girl wrapped in a purple blanket. That stopped investigators in their tracks. In the case file, Aranza had a favorite blanket, lavender, with a bunny embroidered in the corner. It had never been found. Michael's story suggested something investigators hadn't considered. Esmeralda and a possible accomplice might have been inside the building the night before the abduction, or rehearsing their escape route. But there was one more detail. Michael said that about a week after the disappearance, he found the remnants of a partially burned note in an old metal bucket near the emergency exit. Police recovered the note and sent it for analysis. The handwriting was in Spanish. Most of it was illegible, but one line was clear. Si todo sale bien, tú la tendrás el domingo. If everything goes well, you'll have the girl by Sunday. A deal, a third person, a plan. For the first time, the theory of an impulsive, emotionally driven abduction began to unravel. This wasn't just a mother acting out of desperation. It was an operation, with help, with strategy, with someone possibly waiting to receive the child. From here on, the search for Aranza was no longer just about where she was, but about something far darker. Who was behind it? And why? Late January 2019, nearly 3 months after Aranza's disappearance, the FBI received an anonymous tip from Mexico. It was a low-quality recorded call. A man speaking in Spanish said only one sentence. She already passed through Puebla. He's waiting there. The call was traced to a payphone in southern Oaxaca, Mexico. No cameras, no images. But that one line, he's waiting there, turned the entire investigation on its head. For weeks, all attention had been on Esmeralda. The mother who lost custody had motive, had emotion, had a reason to run. But no one had asked the harder question. Was she running or delivering? Investigators re-examined everyone from Esmeralda's past. Former neighbors, co-workers, social media contacts. One name kept surfacing, Carlos El Flaco Jimenez, a man previously investigated for suspected involvement in human trafficking networks operating out of Puebla. He had no convictions, but he was described as someone who moved children through state checkpoints, always knowing how to avoid cameras and police. A faded photo taken at a diner in Yakima, Washington in 2016 showed Esmeralda and Carlos together, alongside another unidentified woman. Phone records confirmed they had exchanged messages multiple times in the past, but contact abruptly stopped 3 months before the abduction. The deeper agents dug, the more they believed. Esmeralda didn't act alone. In a sealed memo, one agent wrote, "If Carlos is the end point, Esmeralda's just the surface. We've been chasing the wrong person from the start. But if Carlos was involved, why wasn't there a ransom? Why no message to the family? Why would a trafficking ring want a 4-year-old girl?" The FBI released Carlos Jimenez's photo to the public, and the reaction was silence. No tips, no recognition, not a single call. It was as if Carlos had never existed, or worse, as if no one dared speak his name. With every door closed, the FBI pivoted again, this time focusing not on Carlos, but on Esmeralda's behavior. A chilling question began to form. If this was about love, why didn't she take Aranza somewhere safe? Why vanish off the map? A brief interview with a social worker who had supervised Esmeralda's visits revealed something haunting. In their last 2 visits, Esmeralda had changed. She didn't hug Aranza as much, barely spoke, stared at the clock. It was like she was pretending to be a mother, but her mind was somewhere else. That comment sent agents back to old visit footage. In one clip, Esmeralda sat silently as Aranza played with a doll. But then Esmeralda subtly reached into her daughter's coat pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and slipped it into her own. Zoomed footage showed no clear writing, but the movement was deliberate. Someone had passed Aranza a message, not Esmeralda, not a social worker, a third party, and Esmeralda was the go-between. A new theory emerged. She didn't kidnap her daughter. She handed her over. Suddenly, the narrative shattered. Aranza was no longer a child taken by her mother. She was a child transferred, like property, for reasons no one could explain. Doubt spread quickly, not just about Esmeralda, but the very system meant to protect Aranza. Why was a mother who had lost custody allowed to meet her daughter in a public space, unsupervised by security? Why wasn't there a GPS tracker? And if this was a plan, were those supervised visits just rehearsals? Each new detail only deepened the mystery. And now, every assumption was collapsing. In early March 2019, Mexican police offered the first real breakthrough. During a routine check on a remote hillside home in Puebla, authorities found a locked room. No one was inside, but scattered around were children's toys, clothes sized for a 4 to 5-year-old, and a preschool-level English book, folded open to the final page. The page had a dark stain, possibly old juice, or something worse. In the margin, scribbled in purple crayon, were doodles eerily similar to Aranza's known drawings. The room was spotless, too clean, like someone had left in a hurry. No fingerprints, no footprints, but a neighbor's old security camera captured blurry footage of a man wearing a thick jacket and a hood, carrying a small girl wrapped in a purple blanket, leaving the home just after midnight, one day before the police arrived. The image was grainy, but the way he held the girl, the size, the motion, was unmistakable. Investigators believed it was Aranza. But here's the most disturbing twist. Esmeralda had already been arrested in Puebla months later, in September. So if she was in custody, who was still holding Aranza? With that, every previous theory collapsed. The FBI no longer considered this a parental abduction. They now believed there was a network behind Esmeralda, size unknown, purpose unclear, but coordinated, resourced, and trained in erasing evidence. Adding to the mystery, Esmeralda never named names. Not one. Not even during trial. She didn't try to cut a deal. She never gave up a single accomplice. She pled guilty to abducting her biological daughter and quietly accepted a 20-month sentence. A sentence many found disturbingly light. Because if she was just a pawn, why protect the ones behind it? One agent wrote in a report, she didn't stay silent out of fear. She stayed silent because the person who still holds power is the one holding that child. The final theory, the one no one wanted to say aloud, was this. Esmeralda was a tool. The real orchestrator never appeared, never left a trace, and knew exactly how the system would label Esmeralda as just another mother who broke the rules, instead of digging deeper. And in the middle of all that was Aranza, a child stolen not just by one person, but by a structure, a child welfare system that let its guard down, a justice system that saw only surfaces, and a hidden world few believe could exist, right here in America. To this day, the public only knows one thing for certain. Aranza was alive, or had been, even after her mother's arrest. But the question still haunts everyone involved. Who is holding her now? May 2019, a press conference was held by the FBI in Seattle. The lead investigator stepped up and made a clear, bold statement. We believe Aranza is still alive. But almost immediately, a reporter raised a direct question. Based on what? The answer was silence. And that silence spoke volumes. It wasn't just caution. It was uncertainty. Because the truth was, at that point in time, the FBI had no concrete evidence that Aranza was still alive. No photos, no DNA, no digital signals. But they also had nothing to prove she was gone, which made the void all the more terrifying. Even Esmeralda's sentencing, what many thought would be a turning point, sparked doubt. Some attorneys began to ask, if the sentence was only 20 months, did that mean prosecutors lacked serious evidence for harsher charges? And if so, Was something being quietly overlooked? A leaked internal memo revealed that at least 3 separate requests to pursue leads on Carlos Jimenez had been deprioritized. Deprioritized for a man who may have been holding a missing child. Public opinion split. Some believed the FBI had failed, or worse, lost the trail, because they had fixated too hard on the parental abduction narrative. Others believed the case was too complex to blame on one agency or one theory. Online, the debate grew louder. Community forums and social media feeds lit up with one burning question. Had Aranza ever actually left the United States? Some said no, arguing the Mexico leads were planted. One person claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Aranza in El Paso, Texas, that December. Another swore she was in Arizona. There was no proof, but every rumor carried with it a fragment of hope or a whisper of dread. And then something happened that stunned everyone following the case. Police in Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico, found a pair of pink shoes at a small market in town. The same shoes Aranza had worn the day she vanished. Soft canvas, white trim, printed with a cartoon kitten. No one knew how long they'd been there. No one saw who left them. But they were perfectly clean. No dust, no mud, no signs of wear. As if someone had just placed them there. Hope surged. Photos of the shoes matched those from Aranza's Amber Alert poster. And what chilled investigators most wasn't just that the shoes were real, but how they were placed, delicately, purposefully, right beside a vendor stand selling dolls and stuffed animals. DNA testing confirmed it. Biological traces inside the shoes matched Aranza Maria Ochoa Lopez. There was no doubt. She had been there. The question was no longer, is she alive? It became, where is she now? And why leave a clue now? A new theory took root. Someone was sending a signal. Maybe the person holding Aranza. Maybe Aranza herself. Or, far more disturbing, someone playing a game with law enforcement. A taunt. We're closer than you think, and you'll never catch us. Days after the shoes were found, another chilling moment arrived. An anonymous Instagram account saw new faceless, posted a photo for just minutes before deleting it. The photo showed a girl from behind, long hair falling over her shoulders, coloring with a purple marker. The caption read, "I'm okay, but I miss Nina." Nina, the name of the doll Aranza always carried with her. FBI couldn't trace the post. The account was gone before they could track the IP. But something had shifted. The case was no longer just an abduction. It had become a psychological maze. Whoever had Aranza, if she was still being held, wasn't just hiding. They wanted to be seen, but seen on their terms. Like they were telling a story and only they knew how it ended. And then, silence. No more sightings. No new leads. No one came forward. Why were the shoes so clean? Who took the photo? Did Aranza really miss Nina? Or was someone using that memory to remind the world she was still out there? The most terrifying part of Aranza's story isn't just that she vanished. It's that every clue left behind made people believe she was still alive. But no one knows how she's living now. February 2023. More than 4 years after she vanished, the FBI made an announcement. Aranza Maria Ochoa Lopez had been found. She was discovered in the state of Michoacan, Mexico, in a small home far from the city, with no confirmed guardian, and no details about who had been living with her. The news, which should have brought relief, should have marked the end of a nightmare, instead brought something else. Cold, quiet, confusion. No photo of Aranza was released. No video of a joyful reunion. No tearful hug. No public statement from family or foster care officials. Just a brief, sterile line from the FBI. Our current priority is to support her recovery and protect her privacy for her safety. No new arrests were made. No charges filed. And Esmeralda, the woman who once led her daughter into a restroom and disappeared from the world, had already completed her sentence. Only Aranza remained, and no one knew what she had endured in those 4 years. Was she hurt? Traumatized? Or simply kept silent? Trapped in the shadows of a plan she herself never understood? One local journalist wrote, "Sometimes a return doesn't bring answers, just deeper, colder questions. Yes, Aranza had come back. But what about the system? The very system that was supposed to protect her was also the one that left the cracks wide open. No one was fired. No public apology was made. No one seemed truly accountable. What was left was silence. And within that silence, larger questions began to surface. How many children like Aranza never come back? How many are still out there, waiting for a sign, a phone call, a pair of pink shoes left behind at just the right moment? This story isn't about pointing fingers. It's about remembering that some losses don't begin when a child disappears. They begin when we stop seeing what's right in front of us. Because a child can vanish, in broad daylight, in a crowd, in the arms of the very person who gave them life. And sometimes, the most frightening part is not when they go missing, but when they return and the world stays exactly the same.